At 88, Paul Lynde finally revealed their names, 6 men he loved in secret. Hollywood once called him the man who made America laugh. Paul Lynde, the dazzling star of television with razor-sharp wit and a style no one could forget. But when the stage lights went dark, he lived in a world of secrets. A world only a handful of people truly knew. Before his passing, Paul never left behind a written confession, no official memoir. Yet through scattered whispers, hidden moments, and fragments of his private life, a picture slowly emerged. A picture with the shadows of 6 men. The first, young, full of fire, drawn into Paul's orbit, until one mysterious night turned their bond into a tragedy Hollywood still murmurs about. The second, steadfast, loyal, not just a fleeting companion, but someone who stayed, someone many believed was his true partner in silence. If times had been different, theirs might have been a story openly told. The third, the name that will shock you most, a glittering icon larger than life, wrapped in luxury and rumor. Were they ever truly connected, or was it only the gossip of an era that could never know the truth? Either way, this revelation will leave you breathless. The fourth, a fellow comedian, sharp-tongued and flamboyant. The public loved to pair them together, turning their friendship into the stuff of secret legends on national television. The fifth, faces without names, fleeting encounters, glimpses of comfort found in the shadows. Behind every laugh Paul gave to the world was a man searching for warmth he could never claim in daylight. And the sixth, a name so impossible, so out of place it could only be the invention of Hollywood's strangest whispers. Proof that in this town rumors can create love stories that never truly existed. 6 men, 6 stories, 6 pieces of a hidden heart. Paul Lynde made millions laugh, but the truth of his own longing was something he never dared to share. And it is the third man, the unexpected legend, who will make you say, no, it can't be. Part 1, J.B. Bing Davidson, The Balcony Tragedy. He was young, handsome, just beginning to find his place in Hollywood. His name was J.B. Davidson. To the outside world, he was just another actor struggling for recognition. But to Paul Lynde, he was something more. Someone who brought a spark into long, lonely nights. The 2 men shared laughter, quiet talks, and moments away from the cameras. JB wasn't a household name, but in Paul's private world, he was a presence that mattered. For Paul, who spent so much of his life hiding behind jokes, JB represented something rare, sincerity. But then came that night, the night that would forever haunt Lynde's story. Inside a hotel suite, alcohol flowed, conversations blurred, and sometime before dawn, tragedy struck. JB fell from a balcony and never rose again. Hollywood gasped, headlines whispered, how could this happen? Why was JB in Paul's suite that night? Was it an accident, a reckless mistake, or something that will forever remain unanswered? For Paul, the shock was immeasurable. Friends recall him shaken, devastated. He carried that weight quietly, never speaking publicly about what had really happened. But those who knew him best said he was never the same again. The laughter continued on television, the biting one-liners, the flamboyant charm, but behind the curtain there was a shadow named JB. The tragedy of Bing Davidson was more than just an accident. It was a reminder of how fragile Paul Lynde's world really was, a world where companionship could vanish in a single night, leaving only rumors, guilt, and the heavy silence of questions with no answers. And as Hollywood moved on, Paul never did. He laughed for America, but deep down a piece of him had already fallen with JB from that balcony. Part 2. Stan Finesmith, the loyal partner in the shadows. After the storm of J.B. Davidson's tragedy, there came a different presence in Paul Lynde's life. Steadier, older, quieter. His name was Stan Finesmith. Stan was more than one thing. To the world, he was Paul's hairstylist, his assistant, sometimes even referred to as his chauffeur or bodyguard. But to those who looked closer, Stan was something deeper, a constant companion. They shared homes, shared routines, shared lives. Stan traveled with Paul, kept him grounded when the pressures of Hollywood became too much. He wasn't a fleeting presence, not a whisper in the tabloids, but a man who stood beside Paul for years, yet theirs was not a love that could be photographed. They lived in a time when 2 men could not walk hand in hand under the California sun without risking ridicule or worse. And so their closeness was tucked away behind closed doors. To the outside world, Stan was the helper, the assistant. To Paul, he was the closest thing to family. Friends remember the way Stan would watch over him, making sure he didn't spiral when fame and loneliness collided. Paul, for all his wit and biting humor, had a soft spot for Stan. when Paul laughed too hard at a party, when his sharp tongue threatened to cut too deep. Stan was the quiet anchor that pulled him back. In Stan's presence, Paul wasn't the Hollywood square star. He wasn't the flamboyant caricature that television audiences adored. He was simply a man, vulnerable, flawed, longing to be understood. And in Stan, he found someone who did understand. But like so many of Paul's truths, this bond was hidden in plain sight. No newspaper headline ever read, "Paul Lynde's partner." No magazine cover ever showed the two together in the way that mattered most. Their companionship was real, their affection undeniable. Yet it was wrapped in silence. In the end, Stan Finesmith was more than an assistant, more than a footnote in Hollywood gossip. He was the man who stayed. The man who in the shadows gave Paul the closest thing to love that his era would allow. Part 3, Liberace, the shocking rumor. If J.B. Davidson was Paul's tragedy and Stan Finesmith his loyal shadow, then the third name was something else entirely. A revelation that startled even those who thought they had heard every story about Paul Lynde. That name was Liberace. The very mention of it still makes people raise their eyebrows. Liberace wasn't just a star, he was a spectacle. Rhinestones, glittering capes, gold candelabras on stage. He was flamboyant personified, a man whose performances dazzled millions and whose private life fueled endless speculation. And yet somewhere in the tangle of rumor and memory, Paul Lynde's name became linked with his. Were they ever truly close? Some whispered that two of Hollywood's most flamboyant personalities had found each other in secret, that behind the velvet curtains and stage lights, they shared evenings filled with laughter, sharp wit, and a mutual understanding of what it meant to live behind masks. Others dismissed it as nothing more than gossip, born from the public's obsession with pairing famous men who lived lives shrouded in mystery. After all, Liberace had rumors of his own, court cases, denials, public battles to maintain an image of perfection. Linking him with Paul Lynde was the kind of story that tabloids thrived on. But imagine it for a moment. Paul, the biting comedian who wielded sarcasm like a sword, sitting across from Liberace, the glittering king of showmanship. Two men from the same era, each hiding truths in plain sight, sharing private moments the world was never meant to see. Whether the whispers were true or not, one thing is certain. This rumor carried a weight the others didn't. It wasn't about a nameless face or even about a loyal partner. It was about two icons, two legends whose connection, real or imagined, symbolized the forbidden stories of an entire generation. For fans, hearing Liberace's name alongside Paul Lynde is the moment that turns curiosity into shock. The sparkle of Liberace's world colliding with the sharp wit of Lynde. Together, they form a secret that to this day Hollywood has never been able to fully confirm or deny. Part 4. Charles Nelson Reilly, the secret pairing on TV. If Liberace's name was a thunderclap of surprise, the fourth man in Paul Lynde's story was something softer, funnier, and strangely endearing. His name was Charles Nelson Reilly. He, like Paul, was a master of sharp wit and exaggerated humor. He wore oversized glasses, delivered lines with impeccable timing, and like Lynde, was larger than life whenever he stepped onto a television stage. Both men became fixtures of American game shows, the kind of personalities who could turn even the dullest question into a roaring laugh. Audiences adored them separately, but when they appeared in the same era on the same screens, something curious happened. People began to imagine them together. It wasn't that either of them admitted to anything. They didn't have to. Their flamboyant style, their knowing glances, their shared sense of humor, these were enough for viewers to connect the dots. Soon rumors swirled. Were Paul Lynde and Charles Nelson Reilly more than just colleagues? The truth, no one really knows. What remains are hints, moments frozen on film, and a cultural memory that delights in the possibility. Unlike the shadows of tragedy or the silence of long-term devotion, this rumor carried a lighter tone. It was playful, mischievous, like the men themselves. To imagine Paul and Charles together is to imagine a world where laughter could disguise longing. Two men cracking jokes, making America laugh, while perhaps sharing a private joke the rest of the world was never meant to hear. And maybe that's why this chapter lingers. Not because of scandal, not because of loss, but because it represents something gentler. Companionship born out of comedy. For once, the rumor wasn't about heartbreak or secrecy. It was about two kindred spirits who made hiding look a little more joyful. Charles Nelson Reilly may have been a rumor, but he was the kind of rumor that made people smile. And for Paul Lynde, whose life was so often marked by shadows, That smile might have been the closest thing to freedom. Part 5. The Anonymous Escorts. Companionship for a Lonely Heart. Among the nameless whispers of fleeting encounters, one figure occasionally surfaces in the stories, a young man named Gary McDonald. A stage performer with only a handful of minor roles in the late 1960s, he was never a star, never the face on magazine covers, but for a short season. Gary represented something Paul Lynde craved: warmth without judgment. They met through mutual acquaintances in the theater world. Gary was vibrant, carefree, the kind of presence that brought a room to life. For Paul, exhausted by hiding and by the heavy act of keeping up his comedic mask, Gary's simplicity was disarming. Their connection didn't last. It wasn't built for permanence, and both of them knew it. But Gary became the symbol of all the others, those brief companions who slipped into Paul's life like shadows, giving comfort in the moment and then fading quietly into the past. Friends would later say that when Paul spoke of Gary or others like him, his tone changed, softer, less guarded. It wasn't the biting sarcasm he was known for, but a glimpse of yearning. It was as if through these short-lived encounters, Paul allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to love openly without fear. Gary McDonald was not a headline. He was not a scandal. He was just a young man whose brief chapter in Paul Lynde's life revealed something the world rarely saw: the comedian's aching desire to be understood, if only for a moment. Part 6. Pete Davidson. The Impossible Rumor. And then there was the sixth name, a name that simply didn't make sense. Pete Davidson. Yes, that Pete Davidson, the modern-day comic, decades younger, born long after Paul Lynde had left this world. The rumor appeared not in old Hollywood circles, not in whispered memoirs, but in the strange wilderness of the internet, on clickbait videos, fan-made stories, and the endless carousel of digital gossip. It was impossible, chronologically absurd. Paul Lynde passed away in 1982. Pete Davidson wasn't even born until more than a decade later. And yet, the rumor still floats around in certain corners of the web. Proof that when it comes to Hollywood legends, the truth often matters less than the story people want to tell. But why does such a rumor catch fire? Perhaps because Paul Lynde, even in death, still carries the aura of mystery. His love life, half hidden, half rumored, invites new generations to weave their own tales, no matter how unlikely. Linking him to Pete Davidson is not about fact. It is about the way myths grow, stretch, and bend until they are almost unrecognizable. For the audience, hearing this name at the end of the list creates a jolt. It's so absurd that it almost feels like a joke Lynde himself might have told. Sharp, ironic, delivered with that sly smile of his. And maybe that is the perfect way to end, because Paul Lynde lived in paradox. The man who made millions laugh while hiding a sadness of his own, the man whose private truths were never fully known, yet whose legend still inspires stories that defy time itself. Pete Davidson may never have met Paul Lynde, their lives were separated by decades, but the rumor, ridiculous as it is, proves one last thing. Even now, Paul Lynde's story is unfinished. His life continues to echo, not just in the laughter he left behind, but in the myths that refuse to let him go. 6 men, 6 shadows of a hidden heart. J.B.D. Davidson, whose tragedy marked Paul forever. Stan Finesmith, the loyal partner who stood in silence. Liberace, the shocking rumor that blurred fame and secrecy. Charles Nelson Reilly, the playful companion the public adored to imagine. Gary McDonald and others like him, fleeting faces of comfort in lonely nights. And even Pete Davidson, an impossible name that proves how legends outlive reality. Together, they form not just gossip, but a portrait of Paul Lynde himself. A man who made America laugh, but who longed for the same love he gave away so freely on stage. Hollywood remembers him as a comedian, but history will always whisper that behind the punchlines was a heart that never found the freedom it deserved. If his story moved you, if you believe that behind every star there lies a human truth waiting to be told, then help us keep these stories alive. Hit the like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more untold tales of Hollywood's golden age. Because sometimes the laughter hides the deepest secrets, and only by remembering can we finally see the person behind the legend.